Good morning, everyone. My name is Kaustubh Bandyopadhyay, and I'm the director of PRIA International Academy, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. The topic of this webinar is what can we learn from COVID-19 pandemic about city planning? It's a tremendous privilege and pleasure to welcome all of you, and thank you all for joining us today. Just to remind all of us, this is the 29th day of the lockdown. I hope that all of you are doing well and keeping safe in these uncertain times. The planning for this webinar started with a very naive conversation between a couple of us a few days back. And we all pondered over the effect of corona pandemic and the subsequent lockdown on the way we live in a city. Now, of course, it's a common knowledge that historically, every epidemic, pandemic, or disaster has changed the way cities are planned and managed. But in India, we often do not realize how city planning can change the way we live, work, prosper, or decline or die. Because 2/3 of our cities are anyway not planned. So what is going to change? In my view, we have to think about 6 areas which might require change and where perhaps the change would happen. But from a city planning perspective, we need to give a direction to these changes. First of all, the way our neighborhoods are organized, the places where millions of middle class live, and also the places where millions of low-income people live. In a way, both are affected. However, it's the informal settlements which take the hit disproportionately. And for the obvious reasons could be lack of space, access to services, and also economic opportunities within or in the vicinity of these settlements. So we need self-sufficient neighborhood, particularly as we experience the lockdown. The second area where change might happen is the mobility. And now here the question is that how public transportation systems are planned and managed. If there is continued restriction on mass transportation system, are we going to see rise in more private solutions, more cars, more two-wheelers, or for that matter, more bicycles? The third area of change that we might pay attention to is work and educational places. And this might entail organized factories or informal workplace, services, markets, shops, or malls, or educational institutional places and spaces. So are we going to see rise in home-based work, or our cities might become 24/7 workplaces so that crowding can be avoided by doing multiple shifts? The fourth area comes to my mind is water and sanitation system. And this is particularly critical because the pandemic in a way has seriously challenged us how inadequacies in water supply and sanitation can impact personal hygienic behavior. The crisis in fact have aggravated many folds in the informal settlements with chronic shortage of water supply and sanitation services. The fifth area is the public health. And in the wake of corona pandemic, the gross inadequacies of our public health system has been completely exposed. Take the example of much lauded Mohalla clinics in Delhi. In fact, some of these clinics, which have been effective in any given normal day for thousands of low-income people, became the source of pandemic infections. So how do we think about our public health system? And the sixth one, which cuts across almost everything in the city, is integrated data and information management. From a practitioner's point of view, amongst all the challenges, this integration of data system based on which the city authorities can make decisions is probably the most weakest challenge in Indian cities. Nobody really knows, how many migrants, low-income people live in a city, where do they live, what do they need. So all these cumulatively challenge the city planning processes, city planning professions, and how cities will be managed in future. I am sure that some of these areas will be covered by these terrific panels that we have today. And those who got an opportunity to read the background note that we shared with you, it mentioned a couple of questions around which we can structure our discussion today. So let me read out a couple of these questions. First question was how cities and neighborhoods could be planned differently to deal with pandemic like COVID-19. The second questions that we are going to discuss is how to deal with the densification of Indian cities. And now there is a dichotomy here. The planned high density, high rise on one hand, on the other hand, unplanned high density, low rise in the urban informal settlement. So how are you going to deal with that? The third questions that we are going to discuss today is how the practice of regional planning can become new normal to maximize the urban-rural independence. Now we have realized that the march from the migrant laborers from cities to the rural areas, the supplies coming from the rural areas to city, all have been affected very badly. So how do we create an organic link between rural and urban? And the fourth issue that we are going to discuss is how urban planning professionals should approach the new ways of city planning in the face of pandemic. So these are kind of four broad questions that perhaps our panelists will pick up. And as I said that we have a terrific panel today, and let me introduce our panelists one by one. We have four panelists. Let me start with Dr. Anil Roy. Dr. Roy is an associate professor at the Faculty of Planning and Safety University based in Ahmedabad. Dr. Roy holds a PhD in urban geography from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and he was awarded Canadian Studies Doctoral Fellowship for his PhD work and was affiliated with the Dalhousie University, Halifax in Canada. Our second speaker is Professor Shravan Kumar Acharya. Professor Acharya is a professor at Center for the Study of Regional Development, School of Social Science in Jawaharlal Nehru University. Prior to joining JNU, he was a professor at CEPT University, where he taught urban and regional planning since 1992. He has an illustrious academic record. Our third panelist is Dr. Tscheiner Banerjee, who is a well-known public health expert. Currently, he is with the Asian Development Bank as a senior expert, capacity development for National Urban Health Mission. He is also a board member of prestigious International Society for Urban Health based in New York, USA. Our fourth panelist, Ms. Tscheiner Banerjee, who is an architect and urban planner, working as an independent consultant and also as an associate staff member of the Institute for Housing and Urban Development Studies, Rotterdam. In a career spanning for 4 decades, she has worked with Human Settlement Management Institution, Delhi, in the Department of Town Planning, Kerala State, and taught at Delhi School of Planning and Architecture. So these are 4 panelists. And then we have 2 commenters. The first commenter is Dr. Ajit Kalia. Dr. Ajit is an associate professor at Sushant School of Urban Planning and Development in Ansal University based in Gurgaon. Dr. Ajit is a human geographer and urban and regional planner and holds a PhD in land as a critical ecological resource for sustainable cities from Queen's University, Belfast, UK. Dr. Rajesh Tandon, who does not need an introduction, he is the founder president of PRIA. Dr. Tandon was appointed as co-chair of the prestigious UNESCO chair on community-based research and social responsibility in higher education for 2 terms. The first term was from 2012 to 2016, and the second term was 2016 to 2020. In 2018, Dr. Tandon was appointed member of the subject expert group on curricular reforms and educational institutions, social responsibility under Unnat Bharat Abhiyan. So just a few words about this webinar platform and how effectively you can participate. I would encourage you not to use the chat box. I would encourage you to use the question and answer. There is a small button at the bottom of your screen so that all the questions and comments can be in one place. As you hear the panelists speaking, you can write down your questions or comments. And the way we'll organize today's discussion is such that all the 4 panelists will speak. Each panelist will take about, and after that we'll have about half an hour, 40 minutes of open discussion where you can also raise your hand so that we know that you want to make a comment or ask a questions. And if you want to direct your question to a particular panelist, please mention that. So that's the way we are going to discuss today. I think that once we have the open discussions, then we can also hear comments from our 2 esteemed commenters today, Professor Ajit and Dr. Tandon. So that's the kind of general scheme for today's discussion. With this, let me invite our first speaker, Dr. Anil Roy. Dr. Anil Roy, the screen is yours. You can speak now, and if you want to use a PowerPoint presentations, please let me know. I will also put it on the screen. Professor Anil.
Yes.
Professor Anil, can you see the screen?
Yes. Can I try it from here, Kastubda? Because I have made slight changes. That's okay. If it is,
Okay,
let me try it from here. Yeah. Yeah. Let me try it from here. Share the screen. Yeah. Yeah. Is it visible? Yeah, screen visible to all of you, please?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Okay, let me put it. Thank you, all the panelists and also the viewers, those who are attending. I see 100+ attendees. Yeah, it's a great opportunity, and also, it's a great stress also, as we are looking the danger which has no cure right now, just to manage ourselves from our respective homes. And those who don't have homes, and they are also managing somehow. So within this context, let me go through my presentation. It is, let me make a disclosure that it is very difficult to come prepared for this particular subject, because we have never dealt this subject before. As far as urban planning is concerned, we have dealt with other disasters, but this disaster is something different, which is to be dealt with differently. And therefore, I would be little general also, as well as somewhere down the line, I'll have to be very specific, since we have framed the question. So let me begin with this, the big picture here. It is very clear that this is a global pandemic, and there is a fear of unknown, no cure, less lethal though, as far as the impact is concerned from the other coronaviruses. But most important is that we are always talking about planetary urbanism, 50% urban already, 68% to be in 25 years down the line. So the shift is going to be from planetary urbanism to now with this global pandemic is planetary health. But that is global thing. We have to come back to our own region, own country, as well as about the city planning itself. So this is how the new normals have emerged. I have collected these photographs from website only. I have never clicked this photographs because it's difficult to go. Pictures all together from India. World pictures have been shown in internet, which is very disturbing. So city without people, there are people seen here, but look at the people, the behavior, the interactions, which is there in the city. So with these new normals, these 4 questions, which Kastubda has already pointed out, I will try to speak on each questions, but I may not be able to give all the answer to these questions because I'm neither capable nor my ignorance will come in between, because to me, I've been in the profession for last 20 years or so, but I've been in the teaching and research. I've never been in the practice. So therefore, that limitation will be there. But let me begin with each question. And Kastubda, please stop me when I finish my 10th minute, because the other speakers would take up other questions. So whenever I'm done, please stop me. So this is how, let me begin with the first question of how city and neighborhood should be planned differently or relooked differently, because planning is a larger horizon, because we plan, basically the approach is master plan development. Particular thing, city planning, I think to me, city planning from, it started with conservancy, planning, and it has reached to smart city planning. And now we are thinking of getting back to the healthy neighborhood. And therefore, as Kastubda rightly pointed out, that we need a self-sufficient neighborhood. We need health as a priority. Second point would be city planning to ensure economic efficiency at the city level. That's what I mean here. And the neighborhood should focus on self-sufficiency, particularly health for all at the neighborhood planning. So this is how and health should become the basic need, because we have been taking basic need separately and health separately. Health becoming health infrastructure planning, health provisions is becoming partly private, partly public, market forces are being applied here. And therefore we need to have relook. I'm trying to understand the paradigm shift that will tell us to follow further while we are doing master plan, or while we are doing neighborhood planning, or we are doing regional planning. Regional planning question will be a little larger. I'll come back to this particular slides I have used from Vancouver. Is one of the example where they are preparing the healthy city plan for, and look at the components. I'm not going to deal all those components, but it is quite comprehensive. Question, which is really, really hard to answer here, because this is the dichotomy, as Kastubda already said. We have 2 contrasts in one city. So density one is high density, high rise planned, and low density, low rise, although they are initially planned, but now it is haphazard. And therefore it brings us the idea of how to optimally utilize the density pattern, which is the tool for urban planning. Entire debate of FSI and other things is all about how to maintain density in the city, both in, core and periphery. Therefore, a balance between the 2 densities need to be evolved, where we can have at least social distancing and ensuring housing for all, which we have not been addressed so far as planning is concerned. There are many informal settlements, there are many homeless in the cities found in all the major cities in India. So therefore I take this example of Ratan Tata 2-3 days back, he was addressing a virtual, webinar of the architects and designers. He said, we are having the problem of proximity. So therefore, the question of density dimensions need to be relooked. Let me go to the my own, I've tried something to map Ahmedabad. This is latest data, and my colleague, who used to be my former student of Sushant University, Meghna, we just tried 19th of April to make this ward level COVID cases in Ahmedabad. And I would like to discuss here a little bit here. We have two scenarios. One is high-rise, high-density West Ahmedabad, and one is low-rise, low-density East Ahmedabad. Look at the homogeneity in West Ahmedabad. It's from core to periphery. All the wards have reported the cases. But in East Ahmedabad, where we have low-density, low-rise, high-density, there are many wards. The green ones are no cases. So the wards are, I would not say safe, but right now there's no reported cases. The pattern is like low density in high density, low rise, kind of giving us something which is like not seen in the high density, high rise area. So this east-west dichotomy we need to understand, and this gives a pointer to go beyond the investigation of COVID and health planning in this particular time. And therefore, we need to relook these particular questions of high density, planned or low density, not planned area. Coming to the regional level, this is again, I'm using one of my colleague from again SEPT alumni. He's been making this particular dashboard from Australia. And here, if you look at the district level, this is also 19th April, look at the district level COVID cases, the intensity. Now also the dark spots are the hot spots. The dark ones are the hot spots. Looks like a clear divide between East and West India. So complete clear divide East and West. East is, I'm not going to be very, fast to conclude that how East is behaving and West is behaving. It seems like more urbanized, more urban regions are getting this particular viruses in more acute sense, rather than those states which has less urbanizations and less developments also. So cities, as we all learn, that they don't exist in isolation, therefore a strong interdependency. My point here is that the city and the region and its hinterland should be planned together. If you plan something in core and does not matches with the periphery, has no meaning. And therefore the interconnectedness, whatever you do, it's going to be. So labor market and production centers, as well as the facilities in and around the cities are very important to be understood. And particularly in this particular, time of crisis. So, therefore, the food security depends on hinterland of the cities. So therefore, and one thing is the learning from the other reports I have following up is the localized and participatory governance becoming much more important, because the governance reach to the PRIs are not linked. We have Dr. Rajesh Chandan here. He will give some more point on how decentralized plannings are being, worked out in India. But back in, 20 years back when I was working, we learned that there is no government machineries at PRI level, because the taluka development is the only link where government can reach out to the PRIs. But that's another question, where how do you localize this participation in a greater way. This is what I initially tried to, this is 1st April, 1 kilometer buffer zone where the clusters were forming. And then we have, 5 kilometer buffers in Ahmedabad, and your clusters are blurring. So this is the spread. And why I'm telling this particular idea is to learn from this health mapping system. We have been mapping poverty, but now it's time to also map the behavior of this particular pandemic as well. And therefore, this is the same thing I'm repeating here. No need to repeat. And therefore, the last question I'll be finishing here is how the professionals should be taking it up. I will take this question in two parts. One is for the practitioner and another one is from educationers, where we are training and educating the future planners. So from here, this is just my point, which is not exhaustive. Other panelists and other viewers can also add. I think, to my mind, it's like master plan. We have to come far from the master plan to the community and health planning. That has to be the approach now as far as planning is concerned. Use of big data, which is not being done so far yet in our planning exercises. Remote sensing, although we are doing it, but it has to come in practice and also in theory. Use of artificial intelligence also, I think it's one of the emerging area where our models can be effective and accurate in designing our land use and other things. And use of innovative technology and techniques, that's much more important here. I wanted to stop here, but for the sake of having this thing and keep my ignorance here, because I'm not the expert to give all the prescriptions to all the questions, but with that limitation, I think there is a need now to relook and reimagining the focus of planning from maximizing the land efficiency to the community empowerment. That's the point. Second approach would be, within this new normal, where human lives becomes the priority, then the master plan, development plan, and neighborhood plan should also put the human life and other biodiversity at the priority while designing the neighborhood, while designing the master plan, where basic needs becomes much more important. And third one is that urban teaching and research and training advocacy may be relooked at the global pandemic, focusing on the reaching to the poorest of the poor, marginalized, so where the equity and other things can be addressed quite effectively. So teaching also needs much more relook, that what kind of changes in our curriculum and pedagogy is required. And we have an experience, and Ajit is online here. We did research on planning schools and its curriculum and how these curriculums addresses the climate change and disaster risk reduction. We found that we are in a very initial stage of incorporating the disasters in our curriculum, in our studio, and in our practice as well. And with this pandemic, it is much more important that it should come in the curriculum, course curriculum. Therefore, the courses like epidemiology and social distancing becomes core courses. Before that, I think we should also focus on the disciplinary dimension, which is right now we think the urban planning is a multidisciplinary, but it has to go beyond that, and therefore transdisciplinary approach is also required. So as far as this paradigm shift, I think we need to bring in human-centric, and physical plan, of course, is the core competency of the urban planning, but it has to go beyond the land use resources and making much more importance on health planning. The approaches here becomes quite important, which is of basic needs. So urban food security, I'm not in favor of too much of urban agriculture, but yes, this is the time that we are even struggling to get our rations and get our food stuffs available. Therefore, there is a time to relook. Health facility, of course, other panelists are competent enough to give a pointer here. Health provisioning, I think here I would like that more and more market-driven planning as far as health and education is concerned. I think there's a time to have a relook at it. And looks, it seems that the countries, I may be wrong, I have not researched it, but countries which has a health facility in their public sector domain is trying to do little better than those who have completely private sector dominance in the health sector. So health provisioning. Therefore, some kind of a learning whether health can become a public provisioning systems or not is a question. And I would prefer that it should be in the public domain. Social housing and social housing for all. Again, we've been working on this for last 75 years, post-independence also, but yet to achieve these things. And this is my last slide, which is like social distancing as part of the sociology for urban. Social housing becomes core courses. Urban health infrastructure service to be the core course for city planning. Environmental social resilience now has come up as the basic for master planning preparation in these studios particularly. And tools and techniques for mapping analysis, which I have shown a little bit, but there is more beyond that. Big data can give us more mapping scenario, which is quite accurate also. And to some extent to handle this hospital managements and other things to be in the course of governance. We are also discussing, Dr. Shravan Acharya and we, that there is a normative principles of urban planning where we have normative things. And look at the norms, which is like falling apart in India as far as medical health infrastructure is concerned, as far as other, in terms of public spaces are concerned, we are not up to the mark, barring few cities. And therefore, I think this entire, questions, 4 questions that we have raised is trying to force us to have a retrospective, the way we plan the city, the approach we are taking in planning the city, and the priority that we are fixing in terms of planning the city need to be relooked. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anil. Can I stop the screen share?
Oh, sorry, I'll just do that.
Okay, thank you.
No.
Okay, Anil, if you could please take it down. Let's move forward. I think.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you so
much. Thank you,
much.
Kastubda. Yeah, thank you.
I think you have made some excellent points. Let me start with this tentative postulation that you have tried to show in Ahmedabad, and the clear divide between the periphery and the center, and east and west. So that if it is more urban, more densified, more susceptible to pandemic, therefore it requires differential treatment. The second point that you have talked about, the institutional linkages, particularly looking at it's not only the planning linkages, but also institutional linkages between PRIs and urban local bodies in order to make it more efficient. And more importantly, the role of the educational institutions, which teach urban planning, which prepares the next generation urban planners. So all these 3 questions are going to be important. So let me now invite Professor Shravan Acharya, and Professor Acharya can also take a couple of these questions, and particularly the first postulation that you have made is more urban, more susceptibility. Professor Acharya?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Kaustubh, and also a very good morning to all my panelists. It's good to interact virtually, and in a way, also to translate some of the challenges posed by this pandemic, like virtually taking classes, sitting at home, and trying to question the whole aspect of work-home relationship, which is very, very fundamental to urban planning, especially land use planning. the four questions which Dr. Kostav, has raised are very relevant and in some ways linked with each other. So when I discuss, maybe some of the things will overlap. Before I begin, I just want to, start with one aspect. Today, because of this pandemic, most of us and all over the country, all over the world, people have started questioning and trying to understand cities, and everybody is bothered about the whole health and its implication. I think one of the things we need to understand is cities are not only about health. I think cities are a very complex system. Health is one component. We have economy, we have social component, we have environmental components. So one of the challenges which this particular problem has raised is how one system like health is related to, say, economy. So one of the urban planning challenges is, I think we have been basically trained to see systems in isolation. Our challenge, both as a practice and also pedagogy, is we are still not yet learned to understand the processes and the linkages, though we talk about it. So therefore, when thousands of migrants started leaving cities in India, the health problem was already there, but most of our policy planners, politicians never visualize what will be its impact on the urban poor. So my first premise is any city planning, city design, public policy oriented to cities has to realize this fact that the cities are a complex system, and therefore if we just plan one component, health, today, that doesn't mean that we solve the other problem. We have to see it in a very, very holistic and integrated manner, and therefore the relevance of seeing cities from a very multidisciplinary perspective. This is my first posture. Because traditionally our urban planning has been very, very, land use based, very, very focused on built environment, and many fundamental issues of, social health, aspect has been completely forgotten. Modern planning, if you remember post-industrial revolution, the modern planning started in England, and basic issue was public health. The issue of stormwater drainage, the issue of public housing. In fact, many of our planning laws and legislation, like Slum Clearance Acts, which was there, or the Boarding House Act, Air and Water Act, all started in the 1860s and 70s to, also because of some industrial revolution and health-related problem. So that was there. So what we need to understand is that I think urban planning needs to go beyond physical. Making cities beautiful is certainly one component, but making cities economically functional and also for the people, the focus has to be people. But today, because we are so design and client oriented, and of course, this is also to do with the neoliberal tradition, because urban planning has become very, very market oriented. So what happens is that we focus more attention on those who can pay. So therefore you have a gated communities, and then you have large informal sector who are anyway not planned. 50-60% of people in Bombay and Delhi live in dilapidated settlements. And today, when public health becomes a major challenge, managing those is a major crisis. So I think this dichotomy in terms of planning has to be understood, and therefore there is a need to focus on people. And when I say people, what does that imply? That implies all our planning laws, legislation, norms should be same for the rich and the poor. You cannot have planning standard just because the rich are there, so they get 200 per capita liters per day, and the poor guy gets only 75 or less than that. That is where the planning fails, because we have basically failed to provide these amenities. So is the case with housing. So therefore, this is very important to move away from being very physical to more realizing these social, public health related issues. Basically, the basic, aspect of living a quality life. I think that is one thing we have to understand. Now the question of density, I think that is very important. Now, see, the tragedy in our country is we are only 31% urban. And we know that McKinsey report or, high level committee report has projected by, maybe 2050 or something like that, we are going to add 300 more million people into our cities. So the question of reducing density, I think, is a big challenge for us, unless we change our paradigm in terms of regional planning issues, which I'll come to that. So the density, whether we can, it is going to be high. How do you manage density is important. Yes, I realize that one way to manage densities, especially in the urban poor areas, the slums and all, I think there are certain physical interventions that can be made. Say, for instance, redesigning or upgrading slums, by providing open spaces, water supply, sewerage, drainage, sanitation facilities, opening up the slums. There has been experience. To some extent, the density problem maybe could be addressed by ameliorating the environment. But the question of, the problem this disease has provided about, 6 feet distance, I think, is going to be a challenge. How do you maintain that distance? And are you going to use that to evolve our planning norms and standards? I think that is difficult. That is problematic, So therefore, I do understand, therefore, some ways to ameliorate the neighborhood of a low-income population by design, opening spaces, that is one. The other interesting question which this particular problem has posed is, I think we need to relook at this whole question of zoning and segregated land uses. I think the concept of mixed land use has become very relevant. Why? Today, you see, when housing areas are isolated, contained, people are finding it so difficult to go to the grocer's shop. But if there was a mixed land use, I'm sure the residents and the commercial area, if they were put together, maybe that could have facilitated what Dr. Kaustubh was talking about, some degree of, self-sufficiency. Of course, I don't agree that any city or sub-city systems become self-sufficient. That is antithesis of a city, because there are linkages. We have to understand that. So therefore, mixed land use, I think, needs to be reinvented. The other thing which I felt very important in terms of neighborhood planning is, you see, we need to rethink about public assets like schools or community halls or open spaces. I think they should be based on concept of flexible uses. How one asset can be used in multiple ways. And today it is happening. The whole of Central Park of New York has been converted into a hospital. The problem is, in our slums, we don't have open spaces, right? But if there are schools, if you design, maybe during emergency, the schools can be converted to, say, provide quarantine, people, make them, come there, or even as a community kitchen. So therefore, this idea of, this assets, which has multifunction, I think this is one issue which I think has to be internalized when we are thinking of neighborhoods, especially in the low income area. The other interesting aspect, which again Professor Kaustubh talked about, is, transport. Of course, there are many issues which we can discuss, but given the time constraint, I think it will be difficult. Say, for instance, the idea of work-home relationship. See, this idea of work-home relationship, there are two levels. One, the one level which today everybody hypes about is because of the IT, digital thing, right? Outsourcing, people can work on home, we can, discuss through webinar. But believe me, urban poor also actually, they used to work from home. There are a large number of contractual urban poor workers, self-employed, who take work in contracts and they do work from home. This is one part of type of activity which the urban poor done. So therefore, work home thing is there. But the large majority, still go and work in factories and other places. So for them, can we visualize, this idea of working from home for those who have to commute every day to a factory or an office? I think that is difficult. But what can think about is, if we have some integration in terms of, say, workers' housing and maybe, public systems like maybe cycling, like most of us know that, our cities, are not cycle friendly. So can we use that? Or public transport, maybe we need to rethink even public transport. So that is one aspect. I think small interventions can be made, and certainly public health issues like water and others can be improvised. But with the question of density, I have to, also, flag up one very important aspect. Now, if you look at all over the world today, you see the experiences of different countries. Just because you have beautiful cities, just because you invest a lot in building cities, doesn't mean that you can address the problem of this endemic. Look at UK, look at New York, look at Spain, Italy. They are beautiful cities. They don't have problems like, slums like us, but they are still facing that problem, despite being less dense than our cities. That is one thing we need to understand. But I think the most important lesson for density is for us to see from our own country. Look at Kerala. I think Kerala is one of the most densest place in this particular state country, both urban, and there's linear settlements, where the transmission of, the disease is much more possible. Similarly, South Korea, right? One of the most, in fact, the Seoul and other regions are very dense. They have managed to do it better. So what does it tell us about this whole idea of density? Density has to be managed. But I think the most important thing is, how do you respond to the problem is much more critical. Therefore, you can make a beautiful plan, but you also need an institutional and governance mechanism to translate those plans so that they can respond effectively in terms of crises like this. So this is a very, very important aspect. And if you know Kerala or even Odisha, see, they have a very decentralized aspect of, governance mechanism. The public health systems at the lowest level is very, very strong. Their information base is much more stronger than any other state, because they started Panchayati, Raj institution, Panchayati mapping. They have a whole lot of experiences which they have built on. So in a way, today, that particular state has been able to overcome this problem of densities much more effectively through this institutional mechanism. So we need to reflect on that. In any way, if you look into the planning, planning theories, planning aspect, we know that, there was something called an optimum city size. Harry Richardson talks about what is the optimal size of a city. And they say that once the city reaches that level, the negative externalities come in, and therefore cities need to decentralize, right? Interestingly, if you look into the garden city concept of Ebenezer Howard, he talked about the optimum size of population of a settlement, urban settlement, 30,000. Once it reaches at that level, you decentralize, make another city. Similarly, the Romans had, after some population reaching that threshold, they would shift to another location. So yes, densities matter. There have also been planning, strategies to decentralize cities and make it more effective. But my response is that in India, at least, the problem of density is going to persist. So we need to have some innovative governance mechanism to respond based on our own country experience, and then strategize. In this connection, I want to link it up. But there is very interesting aspect which Dr. Kostov has raised, and it is very good that I'm very happy that the whole issue of regional planning. In fact, in India, the whole urban planning discourse is so ignorant about regional planning. And if at all we can reduce the city density to some extent, I think that is by following a regional approach, by recognizing the role of small and medium towns. I think this pandemic, if at all, it can do a great thing to our spatial economy, and maybe by that process it will also address some of this, spatial inequality issue, is that some of the small and medium towns or intermediate towns can be revived. Taking this work and home concept actually should be used from big cities to small and medium towns. Just like the Western countries offshored some of their work to third world countries, Philippines and India, I think time has come for big cities in India like Delhi to offshore some of these functions and activities to small and medium towns, so that people from the region get employed there, the volume of migration gets down there, and then it also addresses the density issues. And I think it is going to be very important for us because of the increase in urban population. We need to give a serious thought. Therefore, the relevance of regional planning, I fully understand we need to give importance to that. As far as, another interesting dimension of this particular, where the neighborhood issues and city planning issue becomes important. If you look at the morbidities, what comes out very clearly is that the number of people who die because of this epidemic is majority of them are the ones who already have some comorbidity issues like, maybe diabetes, pressure and all. What does it mean? It basically means that our population, even before COVID, were not very healthy. That means our lifestyles or our city planning didn't encourage a healthy lifestyle. So how do you manage that? I think that is where we come the important role of designing public spaces, pedestrianization of, some of these walkways and the streets, and encouraging people to get involved in some of the physical activities. In fact, recently, that is what we borrowed from China. We know a lot of these public parks with, those health instruments, which is being promoted all over Delhi and big cities. I think that's a good concept. So what I'm basically trying to tell is that when we think about this particular problem and the impact it had to the old population, comorbid population, I think we need to plan our cities such that people become healthy because of the activities they are involved in. If you are trying to travel 4 hours just commuting, who will think about their health? Especially because you have to make a living as well. That is one aspect. Then the other thing is about, since we are talking about master plan and planning, yes, Dr. Anil very nicely said that because our master plan is so much, architecture, land use oriented. You pick up any master plan and you will see the analysis on the health. Only water, sanitation will be there. There are no good indicators of health use. Nothing is there. So I think it is a high time that, public health issue becomes the base and environment. In fact, it is very interesting that many of the schools of planning, actually, the focus from environment and public health has gone down. It has become more urban design oriented exercise. And that is one of the saddest things. All planning has to be based on environment. And health, environmental health is a very critical thing, but we have been ignoring. In this connection, I want to highlight that, again, when I was in SEP did a study called Environmental Health Risk Assessment Study, which was one of the very interesting study to basically assess the, the vulnerability of groups of people on different health. Now, interestingly, that was one-time study. I was exploring, is it possible to internalize some of this health risk assessment study when we prepare the master plan or the land use plan? Similarly, see, this particular health problem is also like a disaster. So one of the things that I think all master planning exercises should internalize is the disaster component. And this particular component, because how do you internalize the disaster, and but not only the natural disaster, but also disasters related to health has to be, internalized in our planning process. I think that is where we need a major transformation, going beyond master plan and the buildings and beautiful cities. I think we need to go there beyond that. Yes, cities has to be beautiful, but it has to be functional, address the concern of the poor people. Right? And the other thing is, all over the world, and this issue has already been highlighted, that it is not the poor is not only in India the poor are suffering. Look at the data from US. The African Americans are the worst sufferers, and the Hispanics are the worst sufferers in New York and also in Chicago. So therefore, one of the concerns which rightly highlighted has to, all this in the planning process, the problem of urban poor has to be internalized. And I think I'm taking a longer time, but just before I conclude, one aspect I want to make clear is, see, our planning laws and legislation, look at what we are doing, how we are reacting from an institutional perspective. One, we are banking on 1879 act called Epidemic Act, which the British, formulated. Another is the Disaster Management Act 2005. Now, what is very interesting is more than 100 years, we still have to go back to our old act. What does it tell us? It tells to us things that we never bothered about it. And the 2005 Act actually is for natural disaster. It doesn't include epidemiology. So I think our laws and legislations have to be revived and, revised so that some of these concerns get reflected very well in the planning process. And only based on these laws and legislation, I think, planning laws, planning norms, the, FSI, all those norms needs to be evolved. Lastly, I think as a planner, I think planning in this country has been more or less hijacked by consultants and private agencies. This particular problem has once again showed that if you have to address the concern of the poor people and all, the state has to take a very proactive role. And when I say state, when this consulting business started, I think urban planning became more real estate oriented. You see, because the land had high value, the real estate had to be, the land buildings have to be bought and sold because we are a globalizing city. And I think in that particular process, I think we diluted some of the concerns addressing the marginal areas, the poor people and all. So the state has to play a proactive role in the planning process. There is need for more planning schools. Most of our today we are talking about planning education. Our planning education only takes students from higher middle class. Therefore, you go to the problem of endemic today in India is not only about big cities. It is also about small and medium towns. And no planner would like to go to small and medium towns because we have never taken students from those areas. There are no institutions in backward areas to cater to urban planning, professionals or interested people. So therefore, institutional governance issues have failed us. So therefore, we need to bring the urban agenda very clearly into the mainstream, and the state has to very proactively take the role. And lastly, when I say state, I think it has to be the local state. Therein comes the importance and significance of the 74th Amendment Act. When Dr. Kostov talked about neighborhoods, and I know very clearly that the 74th Amendment Act talks about the ward committees. I think today, if we had a very strong decentralized system and cities capable enough to address, some of these issues, I think the response would be much more effective. So therefore, decentralizing, empowering more power to the local bodies is very, very critical. See, local bodies cannot act if they don't have finance. We know that because of GST and other things, the resources, I'm just wondering, what will happen to the resources? How will the cities revive? More than planning in the future, I think the problem right now for the cities is how will they revive the economy? The resources has gone, they don't have internal sources. How will they do that? So this is a very, very important aspect that we need to understand in terms of governance and response and even planning.
Thank you.
And lastly, I think, though I said that state is important, but I think the experience has also shown that large number of civil societies are very, very proactive, at least in giving relief. Now the challenge for planners is how do we bring these actors into the planning process so that our planning becomes more decentralized, participatory, is a major concern. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You have raised so many critical points. I think one of the points that you are making is that yes, planning is critical, and variety of thoughts need to go into the city planning process. But unless it is connected to the governance and institutional mechanisms, perhaps planning will show its own limitations. So these three need to be taken into consideration. And thanks for reminding that cities are complex systems, and therefore if we put people at the center of it, and then we think about the necessities that people would require, it's both social, economic, environmental, health, so on and so forth. So thank you so much for bringing those points. And if I may also draw attention of all the panelists that I could see some very interesting questions are coming up on the Q&A dialogue box. So I'll encourage you to take a look at those questions, and when we go to the next stage of our discussion or open discussion, then you might be able to take some of those questions. With this, let me invite Dr. Tscheiner Banerjee, and as I said that he is basically a public health expert. Let's hear from him. Dr. Tscheiner.
Thank you, Kaustubh, respected Dr. Tandon, distinguished panelists, and the participants who are participating in this important discussion. I must congratulate PRIA and both the universities set to think and a very timely topic of urban planning. As Kaustubh gave my introduction, I'm basically a practitioner on urban health for last 16-17 years. So the topic that we're going to touch upon is basically a synthesis from the different projects which is funded by USAID, then Bill and Gates, Melinda Foundations, and other donors. So it's not my only experience. It's amalgamation of the various experiences. And I'm thankful really my fellow speakers, because they have made my points and argument easy, because they have already raised some of the things which are going to reflect in my presentations. The next one. So as we talked about, whenever we talked about the city planning process, invariably the infrastructure and utility services comes in our mind, because traditionally we understand the city planning process means water, the sanitations, road, building, infrastructure, parks, etc., etc. But what we have to think about on all kind of planning, the central piece is people. If they are the customer, so if their health and well-being is depend the way we are designing our built-in environment, the way we are planning their health services, and also the kind of continuous interactions between the nature and nurture, because ultimately whether I'll be healthy, it depends how I'm respectfully treating my surroundings. Next. So it's a loose definition. This is not a WHO reference or a World Bank reference. It's a working definitions that we have developed, and we stand for criticism, feedback, etc. So what we understand about city health plan as a systematic collection, analysis, interpretations of health determinants of health, which helps to develop an effective, responsive, preventive, promotive, and curative healthcare delivery system that fulfills the healthcare needs of the most vulnerable and needy population. Why have underlined and stressed? Because if your health system, I'm talking about the public health system, if it is serving the most needy and vulnerable and satisfying them, we can fairly with confidence, we can say, yes, our system is responsive and providing quality services. Next. So suppose you think yourself that municipal commissioner asked you to develop a city health plan for Meerut, Ahmedabad, or any cities. Just think about small or medium-sized cities. If you will, the moment you will start thinking how to start, there will be n number of issues. Invariably, you are going to confront. Kaustuv, can you enter? Yeah, keep on entering. So what are the components you will see? You will see one hand there is a public health system and program. There will be, you know, the private sector. There are the people, a great dilemma, what we talks about urban health practitioner, at least the listed versus unlisted slum population. And I will deal in detail in my subsequent presentation. There is the issue of your multiple service provider, authority, agencies, and there is the issue of convergence. And then there are, you know, healthcare service delivery, which is very different if you go to Agra, and thanks to the Ministry of Government of Health, they started National Urban Health Mission Program, whereby at least some kind of uniformity has been already achieved. But prior to 1st May 2013, when NUHM was not in the horizon, the whole public health discourse, especially in the urban area, was very different. If you go to Agra or maybe in South, you see under the same government system, the public health program is completely different. And then finally, there is a community and they have the distinct health seeking behavior. And how the people are coming, who are the people coming in the slums? They are the people either from the tribal area or the rural area. And they are coming, when they are coming from the respective places, they are not leaving their practice and cultural habits behind. So they are practicing to some extent with an adjustment with the city life, but essentially they are still practicing the same old habits. Next. Next. So I'm just giving the urban vulnerability. It is a very, very extremely heterogeneous. If you see this particular left side picture, if you see, it's taken from the Patna from HUP program. And the gentleman, the black kurta, is trying to show this the only stand post for the entire locality, which were from the rag pickers colony. So if you see, there are occupational vulnerability, residential vulnerability, and also geographical vulnerability. While planning, this different dimension of vulnerability should be taken into consideration in the planning process. Next. Next. So, no, go to previous one. Just go to previous. Yeah. So, when we start developing a plan in a city, actually we realized our understanding, though we live in a city for a long time and claim we are from that particular city, but honestly speaking, that's an eye-opener for all of us. And for the first time, we realized that actually we don't know the city. So we don't know the exact number of slums and its location, slum population, number of locations of both public and private healthcare institutions, all kind of facilities, be it Anganwadi center, institutional structure, community center, whether this exists or not, and also the kind of morbidity profile of the population. Yeah, and then whether there is a kind of seasonal endemic disease pattern exists in the city, whether malaria or dengue, or sometimes which area is more vulnerable and prone to a disease like COVID. So status of health indicators, because I personally engaged in more than I think 10 or 12 states for urban health program under National Urban Health Mission. And when I asked whether you have any kind of baseline you have conducted when you started your program. Everywhere the answer was no. So they have not started. So eventually, when they are implementing a program, they don't know whether the progress, they are making a progress, and if they are making progress, against what was the benchmark. So, and then the gaps and issues and possible mechanism to address. Next. So in this scenario, if you are planning to develop a city health plan, essentially you need to have a document which has the following components. So what are the components? First and foremost, you need health service delivery plan. And when we are talking about health service delivery, it has a 3 distinct components. One is outreach and microplan, to reach out to the community, those who are not in a position to come forward to avail services from primary health center. Then you need a kind of primary health center, then secondary and tertiary, and connected with a very strong, well-defined referral mechanism. Most importantly, you have to have emergency health plan. So today we are struggling, the whole world is struggling for COVID. Tomorrow we might experience a devastating earthquake, or maybe you already India has witnessed tsunami. Maybe in case of war, a biological weapon. So in that kind of situation, how are we going to respond? What would be the kind of SOP? How the local ward level decentralized planning process will create a kind of ring fence so that there will be a minimum impact of those kind of exogenous factors. The second part is the community participation. Dr. Acharya and Professor Roy already talked about, whenever we are developing plan, a plan cannot develop in isolation. You have to engage the community, be it is residential welfare society, your community group, whether formal, informal. Thankfully, in most of the program, be it NUHM or National Livelihood Mission, everywhere there is a focus for community structure. But at what level they are engaged for the process, that's in question mark. Then there is the issue of the manpower planning, HR, because essentially they are the people who are going to provide the services. And most importantly, they need a training, proper orientation, skilled. Unless they're skilled and unless they understand what role they need to perform, it's difficult to achieve that level. Next. Then program management plan. Unfortunately, again, my experience, and I stands to be corrected, everywhere in the government planning process, they are heavily on the technical side, less on the soft skill side. Management part, capacity building part, BCC, IEC, those parts are the kind of missing element. So it's mostly on how to provide immunization, obstetric care, delivery, etc., newborn care, heavily technical side. So it needs a kind of balanced approach. Then comes to the monitoring evaluation. I don't want to take a name, but in some of the urban PSCs and rural PSC I have visited, there are vehicles standing there, but the chief medical officer and other medical officer, they're not in a position to undertake regular monitoring visit to the field because the fuel supply is irregular. It's very pathetic, but that's the kind of realistic situation. Unless a program cannot achieve its optimum result if there is no monitoring system. Then comes about the convergence plan. You have to have a kind of, at the ward level, at city level, institutional arrangement, which is called, we in different projects experimented out, ward coordination and city coordination committee, taking people from the different streams, different programs, align them their views for a common goal. Finally, you need to have a budget, realistic budget. It's not allocated budget, a realistic budget from bottom to the top at the city level. When I'm talking about the bottom level, it starts with the ward level, from the ward to city, city to the state. Next. Next. So what are the essential components? Very quickly. First and foremost, listing and mapping. I'm just reading out. Each component has a very detailed, elaborate process. Because of time constraint, I'm not in a position to going to discuss. I just want to touch upon the component, and then I will share with the kind of result, few example illustration. So first is listing and mapping. In many cities, if you go, they don't have a kind of updated slum list and population list. You will be surprised to know 30 to 35% slum population, there are unlisted slum. That means a person is starting a planning with minus 30% population. So despite the best effort, that particular organization will not be in a position to achieve optimum result. Second is vulnerability assessment. We need to understand which community is most vulnerable in a normal circumstance and even in the abnormal situation. Then, as I already mentioned, there is a need to understand a baseline survey for all health indicators, not only health, also include social determinants of health, water, sanitation, etc. We need to stakeholder consultation in order to understand different agencies are working, but where they're working, what kind of role they are performing. Is it the current role will going to help us to achieve the common goal? Capacity assessment of staff, health, nutrition, sanitation, everyone. Assessment of health data collection process, what Kostub actually talked about. There is a program called IDS, Integrated Disease Surveillance Program. And there is a program called HIMS, Health Information Management System. One is for routine, other for the disease surveillance. Unfortunately, these two programs, they very rarely share their data, though both are depend, from the government institutions. I'm not criticizing the government because, in the civil society organization and NGO where we are working, we do have limitation. But I'm trying to say these are very important imperative, and if not taken into consideration, probably will not be in a position to get the right kind of, complete scenario. Understanding of program management system, budget requirement, etc. Now, in the next subsequent slide, I'm going to share some of the results. Yeah. Can you enter once again? Yeah, thank you. So if you see, this is the Jaipur scenario, an HUP program, 2011, we have done a kind of census, and we see the total number of slums are 298. Out of 239 is listed with the government system. 59 slums were unlisted. And that means the entire population of 59 slums don't exist in the government, record system. Next. If you'll start with this, any program, this is 2004, Dehradun, when we started urban health program with Dehradun, Uttarakhand government. That time it was, that's already, that time it was in Uttarakhand. But eventually, if you don't have a map for a particular city, you cannot understand what are the periphery, what are the components, and how to start. So map, digitized map is very important. Next. The next one. Yeah. So this is what we have done under, USAID program, Health of the Urban Poor program. And we have taken an Ahmedabad-based organization called Urban Management Center, UMC, to help us for the, entire mapping exercise. And if you go click on this particular map, it will give a kind of all listed, unlisted, slums, including primary healthcare centers, and everything was mapped and digitized. So when we started program, we have the complete universe in the front of us. We know where are the health center exactly located, how far it is from the slum population, and all kind of information. And then we share this information with the municipal corporation, convince them, sir, look, there are health centers which is very contiguous and probably not serving the intended population. And therefore, this is the planning tool to relocate some of the health centers. Next. Continue. Yeah, it is the same. Continue. The next. Yes. So if you have a kind of a digitized map, what you could do, you just juxtapose whatever the data you need. This is a malaria. When Bhubaneswar Municipal Corporation asked, can you identify the malaria endemic zone? What are the words? We collected the data from that, add on the file and get that kind of, the same thing we did for open defecation. Once this, map was prepared, they instructed the respective health centers that before monsoon or before onset of malaria, you have to have anti-malarial drugs on those areas, and a special training would be required for the frontline workers. Next. So these are the stakeholders. I don't want to go detail because we are familiar with this. Next. This is the kind of, indicator of baseline survey. We need to have a complete listing, because this will give a kind of, your numerator, and based on that 4 years, 5 years down the line, you'll be in the positions to see where you have progressed. Next. Now, this is the, the last slide I just wanted to share. So what are the learning? Learning from City Health Plan is a very complex, multidimensional and resource intense activity. So before, starting the municipal corporation, if suppose today a municipal corporation has agreed to undertake a City Health Plan, they should be ready to invest the kind of budget that would be required to complete the process. Because half-heartedly, if they have done something, they will not be in a position to utilize the document. Identification, enumeration, understanding health status of vulnerable and marginal, absolutely imperative. Because this is not only for their sake and a little selfish narration. A person who comes on my home, your home, on a daily basis, that person for serving, helping us, is coming from the slum. So that lady has a direct access towards our kitchen. Then there are stakeholders of the city. We need to understand the stakeholders and their role. Assessment of decentralized institutional arrangement. We need to give more power, according to 74th Amendment, to the local people. Otherwise, they'll not. And also, please remember that when we are talking about the giving power, power minus budget is nothing. Which budget? GIS-based map is an essential tool. Participatory planning is very, very important from the day one at every level, because we think that being an expert, whatever the kind of terminology, we understand everything, but the most important critical data information comes from the community. Health plans should be developed for ward level, and in an emergency situation like COVID, there is a need for a kind of standard operating procedure for the healthcare service provider, because once this situations engulfed us, our normal thinking process stopped. So we need more of guidance, direction, etc. Availability of helpline number, availability of IC, BCC material with the local language. It's not English or Hindi, which cannot people understand and follow. Role of community, members or group would be very, very important, because if you wanted to see the dense area, especially the slum and slum-like situation, it is the community which can ensure that there would be a minimum interactions from outsiders. And most importantly, for, in case of, infection, where to go, whom to approach, that's also important to understand. So in a nutshell, thank you. This is the kind of, I just thought of sharing. There might be, gaps, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Sorry, Kaustubh, probably I have taken a few more times in my presentation.
Perfect, perfect, Dr. Sainath. I was a bit, it was a bit funny, did you ask that, you will be, you sort of say that, you'll be surprised to know the undercounting of informal settlements and the people living in there. No, we are not surprised at all. That's the daily experience. We work in 3 cities, and we and many more cities. On an everyday basis, we are experiencing the undercounting of the informal settlements, and therefore they remain excluded from all government programs. So we are not surprised at all. The emphasis that you have given on the decentralized participatory planning, perhaps it's a kind of thread that is coming from Anil, from Professor Acharya, and you have also emphasized that. But your emphasis on the community engagement throughout the process, that needs to be taken into consideration. So let me now invite Banashree. Banashree Banerjee has been working with many organizations and at different levels, with the community-based organizations, their networks, city level slum dwellers federation, and also with other supply side institutions and academic institutions. Banerjee, it's your time.
Thank you, Kaustubh. Namaste to everyone, and thanks to PRIA International Academy for organizing this webinar at this crucial time. I think it is something, this is a disease which is affecting all of us all across the world in how we live, work, move, and it is a health issue, but it's impacting on all spheres of life. And especially in cities, it shows, I think, brings up very clearly the interconnectedness of, the complexities of city life, which, Professor Acharya talked of so well. So, but I would also look at this as a kind of an opportunity to reflect on what needs to change in planning cities to deal with such pandemics and, emergency situations like this. Now, I would just like to, at this point, give us, remind us of what happened in Surat in 1994, that, the whole city was at the point of destruction by plague. And it had been a very dirty city, very unsanitary city, but this was a good, point to nudge decision makers into action. So, and the importance of sanitation, of good planning, everything came out, and then Surat became one of the best cities in India. So I think we could look at this as an opportunity going forward to change things in cities. At the outset, and of course, given the complexity of cities and interconnectedness of things, I would at this point like to concentrate more on this, planning and health relationships. And, I'd just like to remind ourselves that urban planning and public health, they share a common goal, and that is of public well-being. And also that many diseases cannot be cured by medical intervention alone, be it contagious diseases or lifestyle diseases. You do need to look at, the spatial aspects of how and where we work, what kind of spaces that we have. Are they good for living? Are they hygienic? And all sorts of things. That helps a lot in terms of disease. And I think at this point, what Professor Acharya has already mentioned, that it was epidemics in the past which has actually prompted the principles of modern city planning, whether it is the cholera epidemic in London or in other places. And, our building regulations, zoning practices still continue to inform themselves from this health and safety angle. But, the issue here is that in a country like India, public planning really has ceased to be important in the growth of cities. And I think it is very, very critical to give some sort of importance and power to public planning, to give it an important place, not only to deal with pandemics, but also a variety of other situations regarding poverty, deprivation, and so on and so forth. So at this point, I can think of basically 4 or 5 non-negotiables, which will, I think, make planning much more effective in this whole business of how we can deal with epidemics. So first of all, I think urban planning needs to expand its remit to include the entire city. Yeah? So, guys, we in the last few weeks, there's been a lot of media concern over the situation in Dharavi slum in Mumbai. Yeah? It is one of the areas in the cities which is totally bypassed by planning. And I would now like to share some images to show you what's about Delhi. Now, in the case of Delhi, this is the data from the Delhi Development Authority, the planning authority for Delhi. Now, 52%, I'm calling it informal, of these housing areas, which 52% of the population lives in what Delhi Development Authority calls unplanned areas. And these are squatter settlements, unauthorized colonies, regularized unauthorized colonies, traditional villages, but they include resettlement colonies as part of planned areas. And we know that whenever we talk about resettlement of the poor, there's much to be desired in terms of location, like, Ratan Tata has rightly pointed out that we are, throwing people out 20, 30 kilometers out into the wilderness. How will they commute? How will they sustain their work and life connections and so on? The other issue, of course, is like whether we look at Delhi or Chennai or Mumbai, invariably these so-called planned resettlement areas are located in environmentally undesirable areas. Nobody else would go and live in those areas. That they are low-lying or industrially polluted, and so that is another recipe for poor health of that we create actually through planning process. There's been a lot of concern over density, and all the panelists have talked about this as well. Now here, I'm just showing you a Google map of an area in Delhi that I've done research on and particularly looked at density. Now we see that densities across the planned Dwarka subsidy, which you can see here in the lower left-hand corner. Then the unauthorized colony, Somlihar, and the urban village, which is there, is exactly the same. So I think this, before we start, raising Dharavi to the ground on the basis of its high density, many people would like to do that, not because they would see this as an opportunity to get rid of all the, this big slum and utilize this land for something else. But so let us, like the other panelists, like Anil Roy has said, that let us examine this whole question of density and how it plays out. And I would say that in Indian cities, far too less work has been done on this, even though density forms the basis of planning for services and everything. So we need, I think, much more research on this. And then, of course, there are questions like how is it that densely populated cities like Singapore and Hong Kong have dealt better with COVID-19 than these low-density suburbs in the United States or villages in Italy. So, and I also agree with Anil Roy on this, that at this point, our development, lowering density is perhaps not a possibility, but dealing better with high-density living certainly is. So if we go back to this example in Delhi that you have on your screen, the difference between these areas lies basically in the kind of infrastructure, the facilities that exist. Well, Dwarka has, I would say, an excess of open space and suite of all services and things like that. And I think it is even by standards of the spoiled city Delhi, it is a very, the standards are very high. On the other hand, you have the unauthorized colony or Somvihar, which has the same density, that it doesn't have open space, it doesn't have spaces where you can have schools, health facilities, and so on. So it is a very compromised urban lifestyle that people can live there, even though, you know, we have similar density. So this is a kind of a word of caution with which we should look at densities, and certainly need for doing much more research. The other thing that I would like to now remind ourselves, you know, of is that when we talk about these planned, unplanned areas, or formal, informal, whatever you call them, I shy away from calling them informal, because I think that's the normal way our cities develop, and all cities consist of mosaics, not only in the manifestation of physical forms, but also in the way that they've evolved and you know, developed. And you know, if we look at the logic of development in Dwarka, for instance, which is a planned part of the city, the logic of development is quite different from, for instance, Somvihar, which I call, this is an unauthorized colony, and which I call popular logic. So first, what happens in Dwarka? First you have planning, then you have land subdivision, then you put in the infrastructure, then you have the building. Once all this is in place, then there is a certificate to say that now people can move in and occupy. Now what happens is that by then a lot of expenditure has been incurred in that whole thing, and it is lying unutilized, all that expenditure, for several years before that whole thing can be utilized. On the other hand, what Somvihar consists of is subdivide the land, occupy, build, and slowly bring in infrastructure, and whether planning comes in or not is a big question. So my you know, contention is that this kind of popular you know, logic is going to play in our urban areas for a very long time to come. Yeah? And it is the way of people to build. So instead of ignoring it, or you know, relocating people from there into even more unsuitable places, isn't it better to for planners to recognize that this is an alternative way of, you know, how cities develop, and the wise thing for planners to increase their remit into better cities is to accept and actually support and guide this process. Yeah? So how can we bring planning right on top and then continue the same thing is the question that I would like to have in front of all the planners. And I would say that it's not impossible, because even in Pakistan, for instance, the incremental development program, the scheme that they have, starts precisely like this, that they have huge areas where they actually carry out planning. You have the streets, you have all the spaces demarcated for all the facilities and everything. And then people are allotted land for building. They build, the infrastructure develops alongside, and over a period of time, you do have a place which it has got all the amenities of urban living, but it takes, it's a matter of a few years before that happens. But then that whole thing is affordable to the city as well as to people, because it is spaced out and doesn't require you know, expensive loans and things like that. So I think it is this economic reason for which this kind of settlement is going to stay. And it is wise for planners to accept it and see that it develops in a holistic and healthy kind of way. The second thing that I would like to point out is, and that has also been talked about by other people, Professor Acharya, for instance, that, we're losing track of public planning. The role of the state in planning is getting marginalized. And you have what I call projectized cities. You have gated townships, you have smart cities, you have all these. So the city is developing on the basis of these kind of exclusive projects at the cost of the rest of the population. So here the question is, do we want resilient cities or do we want smart cities? And can there be a meeting point between this? Yeah? Of course, you do need digital platforms, you do need digitization, but do we really need to, have exclusive areas in cities, which we call smart cities, at the cost of, resilience of the other part, where people are facing everyday risks, living without infrastructure and lack of access to land and housing. So I think, government planning, public planning has to has to have more power if this kind of dichotomy is to be solved. So my third non-negotiable for planning is that planning should respond better to flows. By flows, Anil Roy again has talked about, mobility of labor, how food travels in the city, and so on. So I think this flow of labor, flow of food, flow of people is very important for planners to understand in order to work out the interconnections between cities, villages, regions, and the world, and also to see where containment should be, whether it should be at the neighborhood level or at block level or where, and whether we should have mixed use areas, and what should be the linkages and containment points, where the communications should lie, and things like that. So I think it's very, very important for planners to plan according to the flow of. The fourth point has already been raised by Professor Acharya when he talked about multifunctional spaces. And I would say that I'd like to call them, adaptability of city spaces. How our cities spaces can adapt themselves, not only for, for instance, we saw in Wuhan, because there was vacant space available, or in New York with Central Park, they could quickly erect, hospitals for COVID. And so it is very important open space, and planning for open space is a very, very important resource in cities, and I think it just should not be overlooked. And even if densities are high, if you have these kinds of spaces that can help a lot. For instance, I would also like to point out that in the case of Philadelphia in the US, along the river, it was an extremely polluted area with slums and everything, and it was affecting the whole city. So at one point, what the city ended up doing, I think it was somewhere in the or something, they bought up all those properties and converted the whole thing into a big park for the city and cleaned up the river. So these kinds of actions really can create these kind of healthy resources for cities, as well as give that kind of adaptable space. So that's important. And right now, this is an example of how a town of Kallau in Myanmar, where I'm working, has adapted to the COVID-19. What you see is that the building is really the fresh market. So they closed down the fresh market, and they have a lockdown where they don't have traffic. So the street in front has really been, demarcated for all these people from the fresh market to maintain what's called social distance, and as well as carry on with their business. It's just an example of what cities can do to see that, because of this kind of pandemic, other functions in the city, livelihoods and things are minimally affected. And if we have, adaptable city spaces, then many things become possible. So with that, I think I will end here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Banerjee. If you could take down the slide.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I think let us open up for some open discussion. I could see one hand, Anumita Mahanti. Anumita. Anumita, are you there? Anumita, you have to unmute yourself to ask the question. Okay. I could see many names on the attendee list. Those who are very experienced practitioners. And I could see Chetan is also here. Chetan, would you like to give your perspective or give any comment? I know you have been talking about these for quite some time. Chetan Vaidya. Hi, Chetan. Chetan, please unmute yourself. I don't know what is happening. Nobody can unmute.
Kaustubh, you can unmute them. It seems like you have to unmute them, then only they will unmute.
It's, I think they have unmuted, muted from their end.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So let me invite Dr. Imani. Dr. Imani is also here. Dr. Imani, would you like to talk? Would you like to talk?
Chat box is saying that they are not able to unmute themselves. So there's some issue, Kaustubh.
Okay.
Many people are saying they are unable to, and mute and unmute buttons are not even shown on their screen.
One person written said there is no options to mute and unmute.
Yeah, correct. That's what.
Okay, so I don't know what to do then. Because, okay, let me then do one thing.
I think go to Kaustubh can go to question answer area.
Yeah, check.
And if we
can you hear me now?
Yeah, they are in the positions to hear you.
No, I promoted Chetan as panelist, but still it's not working.
Yeah, we can take them one by one to the panelists so that they are visible. Yeah, that's a good idea. Now it's on. Sophia is saying on. Okay.
Chetan, can you hear me now? No, it's not working. So maybe, you know, I could see, you know, on the question and answer dialog box, a number of interesting questions are already there, and some people have also made some comments. Anil, would you like to take one or two questions?
Yes, Kastudha, yeah.
Go ahead. And by that time, let me figure out.
Yeah. No, one question already I have answered to Mr. Srinivasachari. Srinivas, sorry, R. Srinivas, our TCPO, you know, senior. He has asked a very, very valid question that your Mumbai and other cities are also in this case becoming primate, and therefore a correlation between primate city, primacy of the cities is emerging as far as regional plan is concerned. So my you know, point is that yes, of course, but this is a reverse primacy which is happening, you know, primacy in the sense that you know, disease is accumulated, disease is concentrated in this area, which is in a way is okay because the hinterland is not suffering the way the core cities are suffering. But then we have to take it in a different way and look at the other correlations of beyond disease, that how primacy is you know, not always you know, good at city planning, regional planning level. India, by and large, does not have primacy at the national level, but yes, like Calcutta and Mumbai, if we look at it in that sense, is of course a primate city. So I think the question of primacies versus hinterland development is also very crucial, and he's right that we should also look at it in this COVID-19 scenario to bring in the, you know, if we take it larger level, then, you know, at the national level, this wherever we can exchange the resources from hinterland to city and city to hinterland, that can be one of the options. But a more critical question has come from Professor Vibhuti Sachdeva. I hope she is still joined and listening. She is asking very direct question, why all of a sudden the planning has become problem? Why not the assets? So therefore, you know, that's a very valid question. We are not taking you know, density as a problem per se, but density is giving us two contrasting, you know, scenario as far as COVID pandemic is concerned. Therefore, a kind of new dimensions of what kind of density pattern we need to look at it. My simple answer is that at the global level, the urban areas are occupied only 2% of the land. So, and therefore, you know, in India, it's little more than 2%. It might vary from city to city and region to region, context to context, but by and large, urbanization is not occupying much of the land area, and therefore, possibility of redensifying and dedensifying is much more there at the city level. And if we can take learning from this COVID-19, we can reorient our density as a norm for planning, number one, and then look at the space and go ahead. There cannot be a singular national you know, norms for allotting the similar FSI in different regions within country and the world. That's what I can tell them right now.
Here's one, Sunita. Sunita, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, now they're on now. Yes, yes.
wanted to thank all the panelists for very thought-provoking presentations and talks. I was wondering if, there seems to be broad agreement over what needs to be strengthened in the planning process. I was wondering if the panelists may want to share thoughts on the implementation side, particularly focusing on how do we raise resources for implementation, given the current status of our urban areas. Thank you.
We'll take that question. Banerjee, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, okay. So I think for including everyone in the way that I was talking about, recognizing people's what people do to build cities will really not require a huge amount of resources. In fact, the resources that you would require initially would be in terms of land and just planning the land, and then putting in infrastructure gradually into it. So I think this kind of resource-hungry approach of cities is because of the way that formal cities are built. That you first put in infrastructure, then you put in the building, and finally people occupy that. So, and then which locks up capital for a long time. So we have to think of planning and validating planning of these kinds of approaches which don't lock up capital in terms of what you get in terms of planned city for a long over a longer period of time. Because once you don't have and if you have this kind of resource-intensive approach, we can only deal with a small part of the urban population, and the rest of it, of course, doing things the way they can. And that is where our problem comes in, that you just do not have spaces for these very essential facilities which cities require.
Okay. Now, I could see one Mr. Bhatt, Gopalakrishna Bhatt.
Also, can I chip into the previous question?
Okay, let me first take this question.
Okay.
Krishna Bhatt.
Yeah. See, why don't we, in the 70 years, we have not built any more cities. Okay, except Raipur and Chandigarh and Gandhinagar. We didn't have any major cities. Why can't we talk about more larger number of cities which are small so that there is no resource crunch? We need not bring water from 200, 400 kilometers.
Okay. Professor Acharya, would you like to respond to this question?
Yeah, I think let me respond to the first question, then I'll come to the second one. See, one of the points which was talked about resources in the city is there are two things we need to understand. One is the capital expenditure in the initial part when the city is being built, infrastructure is being laid. That is one. See, the problem with our cities is the revenue, the maintenance expenditure, the variable cost. I think when we talk about financial management of the cities, we need to think about optimum resource mobilization and planning strategy, not only to build the infrastructure, but also to maintain the infrastructure. And one of the planning problem of our cities has been many a times we follow norms and standards which are much more higher than what our revenues can support. So therefore, this is one aspect which we need to take into account in terms of our financial management aspect of our cities. The second question about Professor Bhatt is, I think, building greenfield cities may not be a solution, frankly, for me. I would think that since you talked about small and medium towns or small cities and towns, I think it may be much more better to, invest incrementally in existing cities. And that is why the relevance of regional plan. you're talking about resources like water, and other, ecosystem services. The problem with our city planning is we think about city linked to the hinterland only when the migrants come to the city. The point is, city is embedded in a regional environmental system where water and other things are important. So therefore, I would think if you follow a regional plan and then develop small and medium towns, I would think that we would be able to, urbanize much more better than building greenfield cities. Yes, wherever there is a need for greenfield cities, if at all it is required, we should build. But look at the experience of India. All of us know about, the famous greenfield city in, Lonavala, the private corporate type of entities, and look what has happened. So therefore, I would think that maybe we should invest more on existing cities where infrastructure, at least there is some infrastructure, people are already living, and maybe that may be much better resource conservation strategy. When we bring new field cities, I don't know the state is going to do. It will be privatization of cities. So maybe I would go by investing in existing cities instead of greenfield new cities. Thank you. Yeah, I'm done.
Kaustubh, yes, is not seen.
Okay.
Can you hear me? I'm done.
Okay. Oh, yes, I can listen to you. Sainath, would you like to take any response? Do you have any response against any questions that you could read from the Q&A section?
Let's try to look at if you can help me, because most of the questions I'm seeing to Professor Acharya, Dr. Roy.
Doesn't matter, if you have any final comment on this. Well, you can organize your thoughts, and by the time I don't know why certain people can talk and others not. There's something, but let me now invite Professor Ajit Kaliat. Originally, I thought that we'll be able to give you 10 minutes, but it's already 5 minutes past 1 o'clock. So please take 5 minutes. And what will be your key takeaways from this discussion?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kaustubh, for moderating the session. And it was quite enriching to listen to different perspectives. Of course, some of the ideas are known because Shravan has been my teacher and Anil has been my collaborator. So some of their thoughts and their ideas have been known. But listening to them, listening to the different exchanges, as well as looking through the questions that I got about 3 to 4 key takeaways. First thing, I think we largely are looking at a shift in the economic process from global to something which is very local, context specific. So all the more the ideas related to place-based and place-specific economic practices and need to kind of create those kind of planning norms. Of course, considering other debates, density, whether density is a problem, density need to be used as a tool to improve the neighborhoods and communities, because already this is very well used by people who promote commerce. So the hyperlocal is now an idea which people who are working in the commerce and economic sector is using. All those around me in a locality, how do we create services for people in that region? How do we enhance the value of the hyperlocal reality? So I think there is a shift, whether we accept it or not. We have been brought into very smaller spaces and places where we physically live. We are contained now, and I think planning need to kind of, and the built environment professional need to respond to this at all through, whether it is policy, practice, or pedagogy. I think it will reflect, it has to reflect. The second bit, which is not a new wisdom, but fortunately recently when I was looking through some evidences from the past, the classical period actually has talked about the Greek town planning has talked about a human scale approach to urbanization, which is what many of us are interested. We don't want to see mammoth like big, large, complex urban systems which are unmanageable. But as if we have well spatially articulated polycentric city regions could be, or it could be cities which are smaller but they are well integrated into the larger landscape. So I think human scale is important, and that would be something which I heard in different ways from the speakers. Now, one other interesting thing which when I listen, I quite like the idea of Shravan asking for putting people, people should be at the center. Of course, this is what Shakespeare said centuries ago. What is a city but the people? And Jan Gehl, the Dutch architect and urban designer, has been using this idea that we need to do cities and urban spaces around people and their aspirations. So I think it's quite good. Of course, the idea of regional balance, regional integrity, and its sustainability at regional level, I think it's an important aspect, because that's where city draws its resources. That's where its people come and go, whether it is a micro region or a mega region. But obviously, regional scale is important. I am also compelled by my little bit of engagement with the idea of degrowth. I do not think even the degrowth proponents are talking about COVID-19 is a degrowth opportunity, or that's a degrowth. But I really want to deliberate on this. Is there any wisdom in this kind of idea, degrowth, which calls for well-being rather than higher, faster, and further? Should we not replace that with something which is slow, integrated, and very place specific again? So I think there is merit in looking at these kind of angles. Two more points. I'll just close then. Of course, I want to see the world beyond COVID-19, and I think all of us are keen to see a world, how it's going to shape up, and how can we bring the human spirit back to our cities and communities, and how do we strengthen them with a range of opportunities. And to me, my learning today tells me, and hearing from all of the panelists here, it tells me that we need to give more focus to the social infrastructure than the physical. That's what Shravan also was mentioning, not the physical, but rather social, the aspects related to society, social. So social infrastructure to me seems to be going to gain much more. And of course, health, education, creative economy, all these things will certainly be part of that kind of a robust, well-laid social infrastructure in our cities. That's where people will come around and shape places. So finally, I'm just taking a minute to tell, at the Sushant School of Planning and Development, we are going to use these deliberations, these ideas, and we are going to enrich our own internal debates and communication, and see how best we can use this in our pedagogy, because we have a serious interest to ensure the students who come indoors are gaining intellectually, who are going to be the transformers, the pioneers of future such spatial transformations. And we would like to set it in motion by participating, by contributing, and learning, take the learning back to our system. So I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Ajit. Dr. Tandon.
Hi, Kaustav.
Yes, sir.
Let me start my video also. There.
Thank you so much.
I'm full of notes with such wonderful observations and comments. I have read many of the Q&A. I tried to answer a few, but the questions were coming faster than my ability to answer. Costa would remember, some of you may not, that in 2005, PRIA initiated participatory city planning in Rajnandgaon, Chhattisgarh. And that happened a few months before JNNURM was launched. We are back to those similar recommendations from all of you as panelists, especially the detailed way in which Dr. Banerjee talked about it, Professor Acharya talked about it. In the 74th Constitutional Amendment, in Article 243 ZD is the provision still in our Constitution called District Planning Committee. This is deliberately built in the 74th Amendment, not 73rd, because it was intended to converge the plans of villages with the plans of cities. And there is no district in India today where each block headquarter and each district headquarter is not a notified town with elected nagarpalika or municipality or corporation. Other than Kerala, no other state operates these DPCs. They are defunct. They are defunct since 1994. 93 after the presidential assent on 24th April, tomorrow, and then they are defunct. In Kerala, the district disaster management body is headed by Zilla Parishad Adhyaksh, and district collector is a smaller co-chairperson who takes notes, doesn't chair the meeting. This provision of local governance institutions to play the key role exists in the 2005 Disaster Management Act that some of our speakers have referred to. But nowhere. Odisha managed to do little bit at the village level because of incessant cyclones and disasters coming there. But all other states forgot about it. So, citizen participation, local governance is critical. I want to return to the question of local. My sense is that the pandemic has demonstrated the irrelevance of the global. And what I mean is from a logic of the economy. In the interest of economies of scale, we produce rice in one country and export to another. In the interest of economy of scale, we have a specialty hospital 25 kilometers away from the community where they're needed. In All India Institute of Medical Science in Delhi, people with diarrhea also are going, because where diarrhea should be responded to, that facility is non-existent. So, local means local economy, local production, local consumption, local mobility, but that will only happen when the false notion of economy of scale promulgated by the previous era economists before environmental logic was brought in is re-examined. And for our planners, therefore, in the urban sense, all the areas that you have highlighted, focus on regional, beyond the city, include other cities which are anyway part of the economic and social life of people, improve quality of basic social services. If we will have two standards, one for the poor in the slum and one for the middle class like me, for water, for health, for mobility, for space, then we will continue to face this problem. Equity, ecology, and environment have to converge, in my view, post-pandemic. Otherwise, our cities have reproduced discrimination and inequity. That needs to be only addressed if we look at it in a revised perspective of, we need cities, we need dynamic cities, we need, there's no point in quoting 2011 statistics. We are already 45% in the city. Otherwise, 25 million people would not be migrating for last 1 month. Nobody knew that they existed. We all knew personally. But I think we are in an era where local institutions, local capacity needs to be strengthened. And around the local, you build circles of interconnectivity, specialization. So if the local school in Dwarka is not good enough, middle class parents will commute to Connaught Place area. Why? Because the quality of school is poor. Quality of health service is poor. Quality of housing stock is poor. So we need to, I think, revisit the way we look at the contribution of urban-rural in this. Last point I want to make is that on 21st of this month, yesterday was Earth Day, a lot of people talked about it, but day before yesterday was euphemistically Civil Service Day. Lord Cornwallis produced civil services in India. And the number of tweets, very few, or stories I read was about IAS officers and IPS officers. When will we have civil services in our small towns and municipalities? Without that cadre, how do we expect response? And this lockdown has demonstrated the pathetic nature of our discomfort and inability trying to govern a country of this diversity and talent from one 7 Safdarjung Road. Thank you very much for your stimulation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tandon. I have to thank you, all of you, in fact, all the panelists and all the attendees, but I hope I also need to seek apology. You know, I don't know, it's beyond my capacity to unmute people. I thought everything was perfect, but nothing is perfect in this world. So I'll try to build my own capacity to handle this situation in future. Just one announcement. On the 27th of April, on Monday, we are organizing another webinar called Role of Urban Local Bodies in Promoting Social Protection for Urban Informals. So that's an important issue, and many of you would be interested to join in. So I invite you to register for this webinar and please be with us. And tomorrow, as Dr. Tandon just mentioned, in case you have forgotten, it's 24th April, Panchayati Raj Institution Day, the day in which the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act was given assent by the President of India. So we also have another discussion on role of Panchayati Raj Institution in disaster preparedness and management. So that webinar is also there. And please feel free to register. Anil, you wanted to say something?
No, I just got really, impressed always by Dr. Rajesh Chandran. He's pointing out we were looking forward at the time when we were discussing about the participatory planning and voicing the poor people. Now the thing is come here, the outreach to the government mechanism and beyond the government that they do, there are many stakeholders. But Odisha, I'm just mentioning one very good point here, that Odisha government has devolved the power of district collector to the Sarpanch. And that's what I was listening to yesterday's on NDTV. The Sarpanch has become now as powerful as the collector of the district. So this kind of devolution was much more, I mean, I think it's very much appreciable that the Panchayati Raj institution has taken very seriously to fight against, COVID-19.
No,
and Uris,
in India, for every anecdotal story has an anti-anecdotal story.
yes,
Power has been devolved to the panchayats. There has not been ULB election. It's pending for almost over a year in Odisha. So
that's true. That's true.
And in Bhubaneswar, we don't have an elected council. So we have to see both the sides, you know.
Correct.
And it's a difficult question. These dichotomy exist, and we have to perhaps live with that. So anyway, thank you so much
Thank you.
And all the attendees. It was wonderful to listen to your sides. Thank you so much.